So now I want to bring three individuals to the stage who are going to help bring a little more color and context to this work, and we're going to drive in this panel conversation towards solutions. So we'll welcome them to the stage. First up is acclaimed actor and musician Common, Scott Budnick, founder and producer of the Anti Recidivism Coalition, and Charles Anderson, a member of the Anti Recidivism Coalition. Please welcome them. Hey, how are you? Good.
How you doing?
Hey guys, good. So everyone has in your programs their bios. We could probably spend our entire time on this stage talking about the amazing work that each of them have done, both individually, that they've done individually in their careers, but also what they've done to really promote the cause in which we're about to discuss. But I wanted, just in the interest of time, we only have 24 minutes and 52 seconds, so we are going to keep this thing moving. So I encourage you to go into your programs and check out their bios and what they've done. I want to just jump right in. So this issue is near and dear to my heart that we're about to discuss. When I was born, my father was actually incarcerated. As I think about my work as a principal, oftentimes it was spent in Cook County Jail visiting students, really digging into what was going on and trying to help solve complex issues. So I want to start with you, Charles, and I want to just kind of help us understand a little bit. You were actually incarcerated for 10 years, and you're now 8 months out, and you're really in a good position. You are trained in coding and are about to take a job at a tech company. Can you give us a little bit about your backstory and just tell us a little bit about that, and let us know what could have been done differently to have you not be in the situation that you were in?
Right, so I grew up in a very abusive family. I was subjected to a lot of mental, emotional, and physical abuse. And growing up as a child, I was mainly confused as to why it was happening to me. I think there's a limit to the heart and the mind, to the amount of pain and abuse it could take. At the age of 12, I reached that limit, and I turned to drugs and gangs for support, to cope with it. At the age of 16, I was incarcerated for my first time. Before that, I was in school. I was in advanced classes. I really loved learning, but with all that pain and suffering that I was going through, the depression, I dropped out of high school, and nobody ever cared or thought about why. Why is this kid dropping out of high school if he's in advanced classes? When I was incarcerated, nobody asked me again. Nobody looked into my past to see why is this kid acting out. Why? If he was in advanced classes, why did he drop out? What's going on right here? Nobody tackled that issue. They just seen me as, a number. They incarcerated me. I went to a prison. I continued to see this. And, there's times in my cell when I would hear, my neighbor screaming. Obviously he had mental issues. And I would see the correctional officers come in with the battle gear, like they were going to war, and they used to, physically abuse them to make them submissive. And I used to think to myself, like, wow, that man doesn't deserve that. He needs help, and it was sad. Being out, through ARC, I've been able to get the help that I need. I've had a housing support. We've done healing circles, we have one-on-one therapy, and I think the emotional support is very important for the mental wholeness as well, and also giving us hope. Coming out of incarceration, I was able to get into computer coding. I was never introduced to these concepts as a child, and I fell in love with it. Now I have a dream, I have a career, and I think that's very important to provide that holistic support.
It's really what I see, and I think everyone in this room would agree is what really needs to happen. It's really about holistic mental health. Like, how are we really thinking about not just medication, but how are we thinking about all those things that people need in order to create a better pathway in life? And so, Scott, I want to just turn next to you. You were and are an amazing Hollywood producer that has had amazing success in that, and now you're involved in this work and have started the ARC. So if you could just talk a little bit about why you got involved, what prompted you to do this, and tell us about the ARC.
Yeah, I was producing a film called Old School, highly mature film about mental health issues and imbalance. And a producer friend of mine invited me down to a creative writing class in a juvenile hall. And I went down and sat with a group of kids, just like Charles, as teenagers facing life sentences. And the first kid sitting next to me, named David, I asked him how he's doing, and he said that the prior day he just got sentenced to 300 years to life at 15 years old. And he wasn't even the shooter. He stood beside his friend as his friend shot the victim in the rear end, and he got a 300 year to life sentence. And as he told me his story, I mean, just everything that everyone in this room knows: physical abuse, sexual abuse, foster care, so many chances to help David before it came to this moment. And then just when he needed the most help, we sent him to a prison system that just exacerbates his trauma for 300 years. And I just wasn't able to sit at that table. The kid to the other side of me didn't look like he was 11, and he was shaking the entire time. And he was going off to an adult prison for 6 years. Funny enough, fast forward, that kid ended up getting out, and he was my prop assistant on The Hangover, and now he's in the union making about $200,000 a year, and he just bought his family a house. But there was no real difference between Adam and David, other than the system decided to do completely the wrong thing to both of them. And thank God there were some supports, not just us, but other supports for Adam when he got out. And seeing David go away for all that time just broke my heart. And I said to him, and I said to all the other kids in that class, I'm going to start teaching this creative writing class every Saturday. This was 2004. I still teach it every Saturday. And I'm going to follow you guys into the adult system, and I'm not going to be done till you're done. And we're going to change this, because you guys are not your worst act, and we're here to support you. And an incredible group of people came together, and we started the Anti Recidivism Coalition. And half of what we do is provide support services to folks coming home. The other half is policy change. But really, we're a family that started out of about 50 formerly incarcerated men and women. Charles is one of our members, and has now grown to about 600 formerly incarcerated men and women, boys and girls, and another 5,000 in the system. And really, it's about getting their voice out to show the incredible power of change and hope and transformation, and that anyone that makes that choice and gets the necessary support and help can make those changes. And on the support side, we do everything from, we have housing based at community colleges for over 75 folks. Charles lives in one of our buildings. We have mentorship programs. We have career programs. We have about 20 different businesses: Home Depot, Cheesecake Factory, Starbucks, that hire our folks. And we have the only training program that leads people straight out of incarceration into the construction unions, with a guaranteed job and a guaranteed union membership, where they're making a living wage and really making over 6 figures within 2 years of getting out of prison. And really supporting folks when they first come home and helping them get on their feet. And then on the policy side, we've been able to pass 11 pieces of legislation in California, 3 of which gave 20,000 people that were incarcerated in California and got life sentences as juveniles and young adults with no chance but to die in prison, now the chance to come home. So David Negretti, who had 300 to life, because of the bills that Charles, and we always lead with our members, they're the ones in Sacramento speaking to legislators, they're the ones telling their stories, because of these bills, all which have passed with resounding bipartisan votes. David Negretti, who was sentenced to prison to 300 to life, is now going to the parole board in 4 years. And we've... In terms of getting these stories of transformation out, we've been able to engage people, but nothing's been greater than engaging this man to my right here, who cares so deeply and has really given rocket fuel to our Changing Hearts and Minds campaign.
So it's what I see between the two, as Charles, as you were speaking, as guys were talking, there's just this thread, I think, that we're oftentimes missing from the conversation when we talk about those who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated and what's needed. It's really this like thread and understanding of humanity, right? I mean, it's really about treating people the way we would want our own family members, our own children, or those that we love to be treated. I want to turn it now to you, Common, and I want you to talk to us a little bit about more what got you involved in this work. You visited over a dozen prisons like in the last year. Like, why this work? Why now? What got you involved?
Well, I feel like I always want to help where there's a need. And it started with me. I'm from the south side of Chicago, and seeing young people who needed opportunities and young people dealing with violence and hearing the same statistics that you all may have heard about young people being killed in Chicago, women and children, and men and boys. And that was never a statistic to me because I grew up here, so I knew that those individuals were people who were loved by their families, some aspired to be something, or some were abused and just were in a tough situation. And I was blessed to have a mother who's a teacher who was always there for me. And I had friends who didn't have that parent there, or their parents were on drugs. And I saw what the difference in our lives, and we were in the same, kind of on the same block, but just not having that in the home. So what I decided was seeing all the violence that's going on, seeing what was happening with people not having opportunities, I wanted to find out ways that I could be of help and assistance. And one of the first things I learned was to go in and listen. Go listen to the community and talk to the community. And one thing I didn't tie into all the violence that was going on in Chicago was the prison system. And I had the blessing to talk to a woman named Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow. And as she connected and threaded the violence that we see repetitively happening in Chicago and many of our inner cities, where when you don't have a father in the home, or you do have abuse, or you send someone to prison and then they come back without being reformed or being transformed or not being cared for as a human being, then society is just repeating the cycle. Well, my thing is, why now is because look at what's going on in our country. If we don't reach for those who are overlooked, who are not given the opportunities, then what type of country are we? What type of human beings are we? When I was blessed to have the opportunity to meet Scott over 10 years ago, and Scott would come with many brothers and sisters who were formerly incarcerated to our shows. We would be performing, and he'd bring brothers and sisters and say, yo, Common, you gotta meet these people. I would meet them, take pictures, but I hadn't yet got engaged in what was going on in the prison system. And it just clicked with me when I tied it into the violence and tied it into all the struggle that I seen going on. And it so happened that somebody Scott and I were connected to was like, man, we need to go into these prisons and talk to individuals. So I was afforded the opportunity to go into prisons in the state of California with Scott and ARC. And we just sat and listened and talked. I sat with Charles before he got out of prison and sat in his cell and talked to him. I said, wait, this is a dude this is a good-hearted individual, that one of the most intelligent and humane people I've met in my life. And to know that he had been through that abuse and explain where he was, any of us in this room could end up in that situation. And to know that he hadn't been given the proper care, which is something like, look, I'm veering off a little bit, but as an adult, I didn't find out about therapy to an adult. And as somebody who's successful in life, I've been to therapy, and therapy has helped me to get through certain situations. What does a kid, what do you think a kid that's seeing violence, that's being abused by their parents, needs in their life? If they're dealing with it at home, pain at home, on the streets, they fighting against so many things. They need professional help, professional and emotional help, support. They need love. I needed it. We all need it. If I asked people to raise their hand of who's been to therapy, who has I know over half the room has dealt with therapy. And we are the people who are considered, quote unquote, successful. So think about those who are dealing with the war that they're dealing with every day. And when I seen that happening, I felt like I got to be there to help in any way, shape, or form. And where I come in as an artist and as an activist is I don't just come in like I know all the information. I tie myself with organizations and people who do the work on the ground, find out where I can fit in on this, and that's how we work it. We a team now. Charles has been to the studio. We hung out in the studio. Scott is like, we go to birthday parties, we hang out. It's my Jewish brother right here.
That's right, baby.
You know what I'm saying? So my point is that, it's in my heart to do the work. And I feel there's no better time for us as human beings than to do the work for those who are overlooked, those who are downtrodden, and those who need it right now.
Yeah. When we think about when we think about the impetus of, I think oftentimes what we see in folks who are incarcerated, there's like a trauma that's like at the very core of this. I think about it with my own father who was in the foster care system. He just had he touched so many systems. I think about our young people who were over at Finger High School, so many of them were traumatized. I know, Charles, you had talked about at the start a little about the traumas that you had faced. When we were talking before, you had mentioned about how oftentimes, even though institutions like the criminal justice system are designed or supposedly designed to set up to address it at the onset. So when people first touch the system or an intake, they have an assessment. And you described it really as almost like an oil change. Like somebody comes in, generally assesses you, like, you good, okay, good, and keeps it moving. Talk to me a little bit about what you see, and this is really, I can throw this out to really anybody, like what you see as some of the solutions there. We've got about 9 minutes and 6 seconds left, so I want to make sure that we get to some of the solutions, so I'll just open that up.
Yeah, I think the main solution is to bring humanity back into this. When I was in prison, you go through a mental check, but it's very formal, and like an oil change. You come in and it's like the person doesn't really care about you. Maybe they don't even look at you. They're just looking at your paperwork and ask you a few questions. Are you feeling okay? Do you want to kill yourself? This and that, and go on with your day. And I'm like, where's the humanity in that? There's a lot of people with mental issues that are incarcerated and they need help. And you don't help a person by treating them like they're just a number, or not even looking at them when you're asking them, very vulnerable and emotional questions. And I think to make it more personal, have people care about it more. I know when I was incarcerated at an early age, I always tell Scott that I think the one thing that could have helped me from continuing on this path of destruction was if I got therapy at that age. I had such abuse and I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't need a jail cell. What I needed was, somebody to help me process it, because it shows, I was helped by my brother and Scott to, process my abuse, and I was able to overcome it and become successful. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think it's really what Patrick touched on earlier. It's like, how do we think about this, like, before people actually become incarcerated? Like, how do we think about young people and the supports, what they're getting in school? How are we noticing kids? How are we providing them with exactly what they need? So I want to turn to you, Common. You started the Imagine Justice, this tour that happened and took place all over California. I'm gonna start with you, but I want to open it up. What does justice look like to you?
Well, first I want to make sure people know I want to do the same thing we did in California. I want to do it in Chicago and other states too. And I believe justice is as simple as every human being afforded the opportunity to pursue their dreams, to have equal opportunity at education, have equal opportunity at exposure and job opportunities, to have the resources to live a proper life and to pursue that proper life. So justice is simple as that, but for us to get there, it's gonna we're gonna have to humanize Black and Latino people. Like, we gotta look at us as human beings. We have to we got to strip away some of the things that America has built up as what we believe to be truth, and get to the real truth of things and say, man, this is the truth, and put everything out on the table, and we got to do the work. Like, the work is up for us to do. I know we sometimes be like, man, the government is doing this and that. Well, we got to find people that's going to represent us in the government. On the grassroots level, we got to find our resources and come together and find whoever you can find that's committed to the issues, to come together and figure out ways to move things forward. I feel like we're an example of that. We don't have perfection down yet, but we're working together to use our resources and talents and whatever else we have to move things forward and to expose this issue and to change this issue. When Scott said something about the bills, it's like, man, to see bills get changed and policy change is one of the most rewarding things I've ever been a part of in my life. So, yeah.
How about you guys? Justice, what's it look like for you?
Well, I mean, I think justice first is treating people with love and compassion and keeping as many people out of the system as possible. I think we've learned from a lot of the work that MacArthur's been doing that jails are the entry point. And our jail in Los Angeles is the largest mental health facility in the world. We take anyone that has any type of mental health problem, we put them in a jail that is just a brutal, if you walked into this place, you wouldn't imagine your worst enemy here. And this is what we do for the people that are the most vulnerable. And I think when we passed one of these bills, we went up to Pelican Bay Prison to tell all the folks in Pelican Bay about that they now have a chance to come home because they committed their crime as a juvenile. And I was going through the Pelican Bay SHU, which is solitary confinement, and talking to the people that qualified for this law. And I got to a cell of a 60-year-old man, and I told him he now has a chance to go home. He had been locked up for over 45 years and had been in solitary confinement for 30 years. And when I told him he now has the chance to go home, this 60-year-old man who's deemed the worst of the worst in solitary confinement started weeping. And he said, I've never had one shred of hope or love or compassion my entire 40-plus years in prison until right now. And he ended up putting his little finger through the slit in the door, and we shake pinkies. And he said, you're the first person I've touched in 30 years. And this man ended up getting out with no help. They gave him $200 gate money, no additional love, compassion, help, resources, anything. And he came to ARC, and he now has housing. He's doing great, but we brought him up to a conference in Sacramento, and he was sitting in front of all of the probation chiefs that run all the juvenile facilities in California to talk about what went wrong when he was young. And when he talked about solitary confinement, he didn't even stop. He talked about 30 years in solitary confinement. When he talked about going to juvenile hall for his first time at 11 years old and them telling him to strip naked and putting that delousing stuff on him, he started weeping in front of this entire audience of probation chiefs. And I think that comes to the crux of this entire thing. When you have an 11-year-old that is screaming out for help, and the only thing you do is throw delousing formula, throw him in a jail cell, and then watch him go through the system for 50 years, and give him no help, give him no mental health treatment, put him in solitary confinement. And when we all know that an 11-year-old can change. Anyone that has children in this room knows an 11-year-old can change, and we know what to do. It's not rocket science about what that 11-year-old needs to change his or her life and to get back on track, but we won't do it. So in fact, justice to me is what our speakers this morning said. It's love, it's compassion, and it's humanity.
Just what Scott said, justice to me is love and compassion. You know, many of us are quick to say, like, yeah, I believe people deserve a second chance. But when that person is working next to you, then it's something else. Then it's, I don't want him near me. When that person walks into your house, then it's, oh, I'm not so comfortable. And if we're really going to be compassionate and really care about these issues, because these people need help. All incarcerated people need help. They're screaming for help. And if we're really going to, call out to the root of our humanity, I think we need to embrace them full on and really care about them. And I think that's what justice is to me.
Absolutely. So I want to end just by giving each of you an opportunity to respond to, like, what would you want people to do? Like, what are you asking them to do? Like, what does it look like? Talk about love, humanity, these type of things. Like, what do you want people to walk away doing? Like, what are some of those solutions? So I'll start to give you time to think, in case you need some time. But I think one of the things we need to be thinking about, especially when it comes to young people, is to stop measuring the success of juvenile detention centers and juvenile prisons by, like, recidivism. It is so much deeper than just somebody recidivating, but it's really about how do we think about their life outcomes, right? So did that person graduate from high school? Are they employed? Like, all those things I think are absolutely critical, and it's not just about recidivism. So I'll toss it to anyone who would like to start. So what are some of the solutions, things people need to be thinking about and actually doing?
Well, I think it's identifying organizations and places in life that we're talking about where we can go out and reach and do something. Not just stuff that's affecting our communities or just people that look like us, but really saying, hey, I'm going to actually stretch towards doing something for another human being. As Charles said, the uncomfortable places that you have to go to sometimes really look out for another human being. The places where it's easy to come out and say, yo, I'm going to give this donation, and then it's all good. This is the donation. Don't get me wrong, we want the donations. We cool with that too. But ultimately, it's connecting with the humanity of a person and connecting with people who you normally would look at. Look, I went into the prisons, didn't understand exactly what I was going to see. I didn't have much judgment, but I went in like, man, this could be crazy. I don't know what's going to go on. But I saw something different, and it's the thing that Brian Stevenson always says, is proximity is so important. So if you could just go into that area where you're not supposed to go to help people, where you normally wouldn't go, I think that's very important in where we are in society. Like right now, as a man, I got to stand up for women's rights. Right now, as a person, right now, as a person that is not of color, you have to stand up for people of color. And that's just, so I think that's the things that we can do, identify. I'm gonna leave off on this just saying that we got a chance to sit with Ambassador Andrew Young from, the whole movement of the civil rights movement, who was one of Dr. King's right-hand men. And we, at this rehearsal, when we were doing for the movie Selma, we were sitting around the table listening to him talk. We all were enamored. And one of the first things he said was, what are you willing to die for? Live for that. And he said, this was the mentality of the people of the civil rights movement. What are you willing to die for? Live for that. He said, we were willing to die for freedom. We were willing to die for justice. We were willing to die for equality. So we lived for it every day. That point in my life, I decided I have to live for justice. I have to live for equality every day, not just every other day, or not just every week, or not just showing up once a month and just giving some money. I have to live for it each and every day. So I encourage each and every one of you to live for whatever that purpose is each and every day.
Man, how do I follow that? We asked our members at ARC when we were first starting, we weren't going to do a strategic plan. We wanted them to tell us what the strategic plan should be. And our members said what they needed when they come home was, number one, housing. They needed a safe and stable place to live. Number two, a mentor. They needed someone in their worst times, which is therapeutic in itself, right? In their worst times, someone to call to talk them through what they were feeling. Number 3, education and job training. Number 4, treatment and therapy. But through the last 5 years of ARC, we've realized that the treatment and therapy is actually first. It may not be the first thing they say they need when they come home, but it is. And because we've seen people who had great jobs, who were in college doing great, but when one thing went wrong, you could see it all deteriorate. And so we doubled down with therapists. We started healing circles. We do Native American sweat lodges, all types, surf therapy. We do all types of different modalities. Charles goes to church. Like, I keep trying to get him to go to therapy, and he goes to church for his therapy. But I mean, it's all whatever works for that person. And I would just double down on Common's statement about proximity. There's nobody that we've ever brought into a prison. I brought a woman who was the most fierce crime victims advocate against the work we were doing, whose husband was murdered. He owned a gun store, and juveniles beat him over the head with a pipe to steal some guns, and he ended up dying. And she came into juvenile hall, into prison with me, terrified. She had never done it before. And when she sat down at the table, she started crying, telling her story. All the kids in juvenile hall hugged her, and she has become such a fierce ally of theirs, and she was hugging them. And whether it's that or a Republican legislator who was bad on the issue, we've always seen proximity change people's hearts and minds. So I would double down on that.
Charles?
I strongly believe that no child deserves to be incarcerated. And I believe that, instead of incarcerating the youth, that we should be providing treatment, therapy. And if you disagree with that, then call up this man right here and spend 5 minutes with one of those children in the juvenile hall systems. And I guarantee your mind will be changed.
Cool. I just want to thank our panel for all of their work, the work that you all do every single day. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time today. All right, you guys can head off. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. You guys are good to go. Yep.